"I've got your back," she declared in her gravelly, wisdom-filled voice. It was my second Sunday at the church I was serving, and it was passing the peace time. And at this church, that passing the peace almost lingered into a coffee hour. And this wise woman with this white hair and these eyes that sparkled came up to me, made eye contact, put her arm around me and gave me one of those half hugs, and looked at me in the most loving way and said, "I've got your back." And I thought, my goodness, what an amazing time we're going to have here together. She understands how we're engaged in mutual ministry, the pastor and the congregation, that we're in this together, following Jesus. How amazing it feels to hear that support, that connection, that reality that we are in this together, that we're going to follow wherever Jesus leads us. Can you pause for a moment with me and remember a time when you knew someone had your back? Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's a dear friend, a coworker, where you knew you are not alone in that difficult situation, in that painful time, in that time of grief, or maybe it was joy-filled and they were celebrating with you. And yes, I'm breaking all the pastoral rules today, putting you back up in your head, but maybe you'll sink in your heart. And now think about how that lived within you. What feeling do you have? Anybody? How did it feel knowing someone had your back? Unstoppable. Comforting. Renewed. Anybody else? Empowered. One more time? Safe. Any other feelings, thoughts? I hope you'll hold on to that in these days in which we live. That embodied sense of I've got your back. How important that is in these days in which we live, that these faces around you have got your back. And yet today we're also going to talk about the advocate, the spirit that has your back, that is with you now and always. So there I stood with this delightful woman, as I would later learn, was one of the matriarchs of the church, one of the wise ones, who had spent her career working with children who had been mistreated and abused. She had worked in the court system to help them find safety and sanctuary and home. She could have become jaded from the horrors that she witnessed day in and day out, and yet she chose to be compassionate and kind and loving, and to be that person who would come up and say, I have your back. Of course, as I lingered there a little bit longer, my next thought was, wait a minute, what's going to happen to me here that I need someone to have my back? What's going to happen to me here that we need someone to have our back? We know what's going to happen to us, right? What's going to come at us will be life. That we will need to know that we have support and love, that when our back is against the wall, we are not alone, that there is someone with us in this moment looking out for us, encouraging us, walking with us, having our back, being our advocate. I often wonder if the disciples knew about this, and I think they did, having lived with their Jesus. And today in the church calendar is Ascension Sunday. Most likely, if you looked for a Hallmark card for that, you wouldn't find it. Easter and Christmas seem to get the play in the Christian church, but for some reason, Ascension Sunday doesn't get a whole lot of attention, which is most likely because it's rather difficult to explain in any way that's life-giving. Resurrection, right? New life, death, new life. And then the idea of ascension, that Jesus just kind of floated up into heaven, not even like Elijah, who gets at least some fiery chariots and a little bit of sparkle. Jesus just floats up. And we know in literature, yes, you need kind of the wow factor, the Big Bang, to grab our attention. Jesus ascends, grounding him in his lineage of other prophets of his day. And then these two men in their dazzling white. We've heard about many dazzling white folks in the Bible. Yes, in the Bible, not white folks, but the white angelic beings that remind the disciples, what in the world are you doing looking up to heaven? There's work to be done right here. Why are you looking up? There is work to be done right here. They have this mystical experience, and they're trying to make sense of the mystery, and so they return back to their tribe, the other disciples, their community. They know when something remarkable happens or when they're in need that they have to come back together and be with one another. And they know the power of praying to participate in healing of themselves and the healing of this world. Last week we had talked about how Jesus promised them an advocate, a presence. So they go back into community to make sense of what has happened, and then they go to be empowered as well, because that there is work to be done. We know about the challenges of feeling rather small, possibly, and overwhelmed, and maybe exhausted in light of all the work to be done in our days. Our Memorial Weekend reminds us that we can give thanks for those folks who have served and sacrificed for this amazing country that's broken and yet gives us quite a bit of freedoms. We can be people who celebrate and remember and give thanks for their lives, and be a people who continue to work for peace, so that one day our sons and daughters will not be sent off to places of strife and war. We might feel overwhelmed and wondering if our voices matter when we look at the proposed budget that was floated out by the current administration that slashes the care for those in need, whether it's about food or health care or housing, that those folks seem to be left behind once again while the money trickles to those folks who already have enough, or too much, we might say. We might unpack the deal, the Saudi Arabian arms deal, yes? Anybody know that there's a lot of oil in Saudi Arabia, right? And that if we look at the Saudi Arabian women and the amount of abuse and mistreatment that they daily go through, it's complex, yes? We might feel like our voices don't matter, and we might feel rather overwhelmed, and we might be exhausted from the dailiness of our lives, of juggling schedules, family schedules, and work schedules. And I know in those times, in those moments in my life when I feel overwhelmed or exhausted or small or afraid, it's hard to be generous. It's difficult to say to someone, hey, I've got your back, when I wonder if anyone really has mine. Y'all with me? And yet into this fear or exhaustion or bewilderment or wondering if our voices matter, in this very moment, God continues to breathe this promise of an advocate. God's been doing this since the beginning of time. God gave us Jesus to be reminded that we will always have that presence, and now we hear very clearly, and next week at Pentecost we get to celebrate it, and I hope there will be a lot more cartwheels happening down the... Please come anyway, even if cartwheels are not your thing. But we are promised this advocate, this comforter, this healer. God's Spirit is with us and gives us this power to be agents of healing and creative transformation in our time. Whether we believe it's possible or not, it's happening still in this moment. That's why we continue to come together to be in community, to remind ourselves, I need you, you need me, and we need one another. It's one of the reasons why we learn how to pray, because prayer is that active process of aligning our lives with God's vision. Learning to listen. More and more, y'all, I think prayer is less about us chatting to God and more listening to what God has in store for each of us. Although chatting with God's important too. Prayer allows us to be those people who rise up, to be those people who take risks in saying to those many people in our lives who need someone to say, I have your back. And to allow that gift of someone saying to us and to me, I have your back. Let us be a people who allow our God to be the animating force, the creative energy, the reality in whom we live and move and have our very being, so that we can rise up time and time again to allow the advocate to be our advocate, so that we too can be others' advocates. Amen.